Folks, welcome back to Tent Outdoors. My name is Alan from season 10 of Alone. This video is going to do the recap of episode 4, season 11 of Alone. So I'm up here in a place just outside of Castlegar in British Columbia. I used to spend time out here as a kid, grouse hunting, fishing, camping with an old high school buddy who has a place out here. So I'm back here many years later, camping with some friends. And check out this view. I'm on top of the cliff, overlooking the reservoir where Castlegar actually gets their water. It's a beautiful spot. Let's get started. So I did have some pretty powerful connections with this episode, especially when Sarah had that experience with the owl. Back from season 10, if you watch my scene of that owl, and that owl visited Sarah at her site, it brought back a lot of those powerful emotions and feelings I had when I had that kind of spiritual experience when that owl visited my site during my first week out there. It's pretty intense and brought back a lot of those old feelings, you know. Oh, and when Jake was talking about his father who passed away suddenly after that surgery he had, again, that brought a lot of feelings back about my dad too. I could also really relate to what Dusty was saying about his family. He said, yeah, I miss them, but I don't miss them as much as I thought I would, because he knows that his wife and his kids, they wanted him to embrace this experience as much as he could, and that he knew that back home, everything was fine, and they want him to do well out here and stay out here as long as he can. So he didn't have that draw. And I had that same sort of thing. Like, I knew my family was good back home. I knew that if I came home early, my kids would be like, Dad, what are you doing here? Why did you come home? My wife would be like, Al, why are you back? So I didn't have that draw. And not having that draw pulling you back home, knowing that everything's good, is a very powerful weapon to have when you're out there doing the alone experience. The first scene of the episode shows Dusty washing his hair with horsetail ferns, which are naturally kind of abrasive and good for cleaning. And then he also talks about washing his other end, but thankfully he turned off the camera for that. Dusty heads down to the river to check one of his set lines, and he finds a decent sized pike on the end of one of his lines, and he lands it successfully. He then talks about how bony these fish are compared to the catfish that he's used to catching back home that hardly have any bones. If you've never cleaned a pike before, they really have this, they've got a strip of what are called Y bones on the edge of one of their fillets. And it takes a lot of practice to learn how to take those Y bones out. And I think that's what he was getting stuck in his throat, those little Y bones. He makes a comment about, man, if I do get one of these bones stuck in my tonsils and I start choking, the team won't be able to get here in time to help me anyways. And that's something I think the audience needs to be reminded of sometimes. Yes, we have a tap out button. Yes, the safety team can come in and help us if we need it. But man, if you do have some sort of life-threatening situation, you're still out of luck. Like 45 minutes, I think, was the time that it would take the team to get to Dusty. So, I mean, we have to sign a lot of forms, and it's important for everyone to realize that if you do have something serious that happens to you out there, the team may not be able to get to you in time. So Dusty starts on the smoker, but as he's doing so, he starts complaining about a pain he has in his stomach. That's a first little sign of foreshadowing from the producers. I love Dusty's next scene. Man, this guy is so honest and so real. So he harvests his first grouse, but he didn't get it on camera. And that happens a lot out there. Like, if you're just sitting there and you see an opportunity at a small game animal or even a large game animal, it's like, okay, do I risk not harvesting this animal because I need to set up my equipment, or do I just go and harvest this animal? And I think it was the latter case for Dusty. So he harvests this grouse, he shows it on camera, and he explained to the viewers how he had such a hard time hitting this grouse with his bow, and I totally understand that. He's like, he did a really good job explaining. He acted the whole thing out. He was like, he was shaking and he was nervous, and I think he said he missed the grouse 4 times, but he just kept moving closer and closer, and he ended up centering it and toppled it over and was successful. Again, Dusty makes a comment about the pain in his guts. So they show Dusty trying to force down a few pieces of grouse, and you can see by his body language that, man, he is not feeling well, but he just forced himself to swallow a couple mouthfuls of grouse, and his stomach just continues to get worse and worse. No matter how hard Dusty tried, he could not shake that pain in his stomach, and he reveals to the audience that he hasn't gone to the bathroom in 10 days and he is severely constipated. He says it's pretty embarrassing, but really it's not, because it's a common thing that happens to alone contestants is constipation. It's a real issue out there. And instead of risking serious health repercussions, he decides to tap out of the competition. Man, Dusty is such a solid, honest, real human being. It was tough seeing him go. I was really rooting for him. Dusty made no excuses. He was super thankful for the whole experience and the adventure that he was on. He says, I don't need the money, man. I have my family. I have the love in my family, and I have everything I need. So after 11 days in this competition, there were 3 people gone, and we're down to 7. So up next on the episode was William. They show William building a small, cozy shelter. I like his thinking on how his shelter is just going to be small, so it'll be much easier to heat. And he's also being very efficient with his calories. He said everything he needs for his shelter is very, very close. All he needs to haul at a distance is the clay to make his fireplace. He's also utilizing a piece of his equipment, his gaiters. He sealed off one end, and he's using his gaiters to carry the clay from the river back up to his shelter. So he's using a lot of rocks to build his fire pit in the back of his shelter. And I like his thinking on this. He's surrounding his whole fireplace with larger rocks because he's just going to have a small fire, and he's going to use the heat from that small fire to heat up those larger rocks, which will in turn heat up his shelter. I use that kind of philosophy. Well, it's not a philosophy. I use that fact. Instead of me having a fire all night in my teepee when it started getting really cold, I heated up 3 like bowling ball sized rocks in my fire before I went to bed, and I used them to keep me warm all night in my sleeping bag. So William continues with firsts on the show. Not only was he able to bang a large stick on the water and kill some small fish with the shock created by that, but he was also able to tie a noose, like a little snare on the end of a long stick, and actually snare grouse by hand by walking up to them and placing the stick in front of them and slipping the noose over their neck. I've never seen that before. Man, that was nicely done. I thought, you know what, he'll never be able to do that again. He kills the first grouse, stashes it in his cache in the rocks, then he goes out and gets another one using the same technique. Super impressive, and I was just like, wow, unreal, William. So William was then featured lying down, undressed in the sun, apparently sunning all parts of his body. I'm just saying there were some interesting camera angles, but hey, you got to keep your stuff dry. You got to admit, William is keeping a super positive, upbeat mindset in this game, which is also a super powerful weapon. They show William heading to his food cache that he has on a small rock face, and he's going to retrieve his grouse, and to his surprise, the grouse is gone. Folks, everything out there wants to eat your food, and you have to take a lot of precautions to protect critters like marten, bears, birds from trying to get your food. At one point in the game, when I was out there like in the day 40s, I did have quite a bit of smoked fish stored, and we were given a bear hang as part of our equipment to keep our food safe. And I kept all my fish in this bear hang, but instead of hanging it in a tree, I did hang it in a tree earlier in the game, but then when I started seeing a lot of martens, I realized, you know what? Martens can climb that tree and rip through that bag and eat my fish, no problem. So I started carrying my bag of fish with me wherever I went, and I guarded it. If I was fishing, it was laying 10 feet away in the shade. And at night times, I kept it hung in my shelter. I mean, I was willing to defend my fish from anything that was going to try to take it. Next up in the episode, we have Sarah. There's a brief scene of Sarah doing some hand lining, but unfortunately she's unsuccessful catching a fish using that technique. She then has a visit from an owl. And from season 10, the experience I had with the owl, it brought back a lot of those old emotions and kind of the spirituality of the whole experience when you get a visitation from an owl like that. If you believe in that kind of stuff, you know, kind of on the fence, but the experience I had out there, if you watch my scene from season 10, it was pretty surreal, and it was pretty intense, and I got pretty emotional. She did allude to the whole spirituality of that whole moment, and she mentioned, I wonder if there's any significance from this visitation I had from this owl. Sarah mentions she is foraging quite well, and she's harvesting quite a bit of roots for carbs, but she's yet to harvest any protein so far in the game, and up to this point she's lost 9 pounds. The next scene, they show Sarah making a successful shot on a grouse with her recurve bow. It is very difficult to hit a grouse or a squirrel with a recurve bow, especially at awkward shooting angles up in the tree, if you're not practicing those. That's something I wish I did practice more in my experience out there, because I just practiced on the ground. I wished I'd practiced more shooting up in trees at extreme angles because I missed more grouse than I should have during my experience out there. And you can't forget the added stress of knowing that if you miss this shot, that one grouse or that one fish or that one squirrel could make the difference between becoming first or second. So as Sarah's cleaning her grouse, she mentions that this grouse will provide enough food for the next week. So I did a little research, and the average grouse has about 700 calories. And even if she ate that entire grouse on one day, 700 calories is still kind of like a starvation diet. So there's no way that a grouse can keep you going caloric-wise for a week. Sarah talks about how she didn't bring a photo of her family. She says, I already know what my family looks like. So instead she brought some pictures that her grandkids made for her. And I really like that thought because, you know, having a picture of your family when you're missing them isn't necessarily going to make you feel better. I did the same thing Sarah did. I did not bring any photos of my family because I knew if I was going through a bad time, a hard day or whatever, an hour missing my family, looking at a picture of them, it's not going to make me feel any better. Next scene, they show Sarah making some gorge hooks. Now, gorge hooks are just a primitive way of fishing where you take a small stick and you sharpen both ends of the stick and you thread some bait on that and you put it out as a set line. The idea is that the fish are going to swallow this bait with the gorge hook and it gets stuck in their throat and kind of turn sideways and you're able to bring them in. And she was going to make a bunch of those and put them out as set lines. Now, she's so confident in the ability of these hooks to work. I'm not sure why, but she decided not to use the actual hooks that she brought with her. We'll see how those gorge hooks work out. Hopefully they're successful and all her set lines have massive pike on the end of them. So when Sarah harvested that grouse, she was excited to keep the guts to use as set lines. So she took those guts and she wrapped them in spruce boughs and she stashed them somewhere in the shade. When she went back later to retrieve those grouse guts to bait up her gorge hooks, she noticed that they were gone and some critter, possibly a bird or a marten, had found them. Folks, if you've ever cleaned a grouse before, grouse guts reek. They've got a really strong, pungent smell that everything in the forest is going to be attracted to. So I'm not surprised at all that those grouse guts were missing when she went back to retrieve them. So just a quick story about how much every critter in the forest loves to eat guts. A couple years ago, I harvested a deer. I gutted it, left the gut pile in the bush, removed the animal, and I set a game cam up over the gut pile. And by noon the next day, there was like barely a smear of blood on the grass where that gut pile was. There were eagles that came in, ravens, all different types of birds, and coyotes, and that gut pile was gone by noon the next day. Unfortunately now, Sarah has no bait for her set lines. So even though Sarah lost her bait for her set lines, I love what she says next. Stay positive and figure it out. A tree just fell in the forest. I don't know if you guys heard that. If a tree falls in the forest, does anybody hear? Yes, because I just heard it. If you allow your mind to go to a negative place when you face a setback on the show, man, you can decline really, really quickly. Because it's so easy to be negative out there because things are constantly not going as you planned. So keeping a positive mindset out there is another very powerful weapon to have. Sarah's next scene, they show her foraging and she comes across a massive find of bolete mushrooms and harvests every single one of them. Man, it was unbelievable. Jake is up next and they show him checking his empty gill net. He then recalls the lessons of his father about never giving up and showing resilience, and he moves it to a different, deeper location. Jake then decides to wash some clothes. He's gonna boil his underpants in his pot to clean them. And I couldn't help but think, maybe I'm not the only one, maybe I am, but you're gonna boil your sweaty, pasty, dirty underpants in the same pot you're gonna be cooking your fish in. I couldn't help but think, what's worse? Wearing dirty underpants or having fish that tastes like dirty underpants? I don't know. Folks, maybe I'm just gross and dirty and crude, but I never actually washed any of my clothes out there. I mean, I had merino wool everything, and I really found that the merino wool did a good job keeping your stuff from getting smelly and gross. Funny story, the day my wife picked me up on day 66, I mean, obviously we spent quite a bit of time together, and I remember her clearly saying that I didn't really smell. All I smelled like was campfire smoke. Actually, I did have a bit of BO, but it wasn't bad at all. Yes, I was totally dirty, but I think me hovering over the campfire all the time and being exposed to smoke, which has purification properties, I'm sure that that smoke helped me smell better and helped keep me kind of clean. I don't know, maybe not. So Jake forgets his gloves and he ends up burning his hands quite badly when he was trying to remove the pot from the fire. He sucks it up, bandages up his wounds, and he keeps pushing forward. He really showed a lot of resilience and toughness during that scene. I am worried about infection because burns are notorious for becoming infected quite easily. He's going to have to really work on keeping that wound clean, freshly bandaged to avoid it becoming infected. One careless moment out there, whether it's with an axe, a knife, a saw, the fire, one moment of a loss of concentration can take you out of the game. We've seen it in multiple seasons previous to this one. He shares with the audience how his father passed away suddenly after a reasonably routine surgery, and he's going to tough it out. He wants to be his father's son, and he's going to keep pushing and be resilient. This guy's voice is awesome. The way he speaks so slowly and methodically, and it's really captivating and easy to listen to. Man, this guy could make a fortune recording ebooks. He mentioned because he can't shoot his bow due to his injury, he's going to focus solely on fishing until his hand heals up. He heads down to his gill net and he finds 2 large pike in his gill net. He says this is a turning point for him and he gets right to work on building a smoker. Next up on the episode is Timber. They show him surveying his land from the highest point of his area, looking for moose. Timber gets to work on his gill net and decides he's going to focus on the river for his food. He heads down to the water to check his set lines and he finds 2 large pike on the end of his set lines. Folks, I gotta say it again. That shallow, muddy, small river is absolutely full of massive pike. It's unbelievable. Next scene, Timber is shown having a nosebleed, and he does something pretty smart. He's making sure he doesn't dribble any of the blood on the ground. He's collecting it all in leaves so he can burn it in the fire as to not attract predators. Smart move, Timber. So he pretended to be talking like a bear, and he said, "If it bleeds, we can kill it." I'm reasonably certain that that is a scene from Predator. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I'm curious if anybody else caught that reference to that old movie. They then show Timber building a large A-frame lean-to style shelter. Now, he is using massive logs, but in defense of Timber, he did say that that's all he had available to him. He talked to the audience directly. He goes, "You're probably wondering why I'm using such large logs and you think I'm wasting my calories," but he goes, "That's all I got." So that's all he's got. And it's early in the game. He says he's feeling strong. He has the energy. So, hey, I don't think it's a horrible move. And the shelter actually looks pretty darn good. I actually quite like it. I like his simple style of a shelter with a fire pit in the back, and I think it's going to work out quite well. He also shares with the audience how his brother passed away in 2001, and he always has him in his heart. His brother's always with him. The next scene is a pretty cool shot of Timber eating some fish with a shelter in the background. He's got his back to the camera and he's kind of turning around. It was a really cool shot. And as he's eating his fish, kind of talking to the camera, he hears a large animal moving through the bush. He grabs his bow to investigate. Now, I was confused by something he said. As he was leaving, he said there was an owl trying to chase him away and he was throwing sticks at it to scare it away. I want to know more about this. They didn't really talk about it. Hopefully the next episode they'll maybe talk a little bit more about that. So upon his investigation of the moose, sure enough, he sees a moose in the distance. So he starts preparing a stalk, he sets himself up, and he does a pretty solid cow moose call, and the moose is moving towards him. Now, man, what a cliffhanger here. So the moose is close, it looks like it's in range, it looks like it's maybe 20 to 30 yards away. It's really hard to tell distance in a GoPro. But of course the episode ends just as he's preparing for the shot. Pretty exciting, and I can't wait for next week to see what happens with this moose. Yeah, thanks a lot, producers, but it worked. So I want to talk about the first series of shots that Timber had on that moose. Now, I think on that first shot he missed low because people who don't spend a lot of time around moose and don't hunt moose don't realize how massive they are. So I think that moose was a little bit further away than Timber realized because he didn't realize how massive of an animal that is, and he missed low. But that's just a theory. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for episode 5 recap. We'll see you next time.